Welcome to RELANZA, the podcast that connects you with expert voices on the most innovative topics in language education. I'm Mercedes Querol from the Universidad Internacional de La Rioja and the coordinator of this space. Don't miss it. RELANZA starts right now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of RELANZA. And on this occasion, our podcast is about sustainability in the language curriculum. And today we have the pleasure of having Paul Meighan with us. Hi, Paul.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for wanting to be a part of RELANZA. So my first question for you is, could you tell us 3 things about yourself that you would like people to know?
Yes. First of all, I identify as Indigenous to the Scottish Highlands and Islands. I am a Scottish Gael. I was born and raised in Glasgow, Scotland, also known in the Scottish Gaelic language as Ballymore na Gael, other words meaning the big city of the Gaels. My family comes from the Isle of South Uist, an Indigenous community, Gaelic community in the Scottish Highlands and Islands. And my work in language education itself is rooted in my own journey of reclaiming Scottish Gaelic, an endangered Indigenous language in Scotland, and reconnecting to my land, community, and identity. That's why I care deeply about decolonizing language practices and building sustainable relational futures. Second, I'm passionate about bridging worlds and learning with diverse ways of knowing and being. In addition to English, I speak Gaelic, Scottish Gaelic, French, Spanish, and Italian. My husband is Anishinaabe Ojibwe, indigenous to Turtle Island, or what is also known as North America. I'm on a lifelong learning journey of learning more about the relationships between languages, lands, cultures, and worldviews. And my work specifically focuses on creating space for Indigenous and heritage knowledges, including the traditional ecological knowledge carried by Indigenous languages, like my husband's ancestral language, Anishinaabe, and my own endangered Indigenous language, Scottish Gaelic. And my work seeks to center those knowledges to be included alongside dominant languages like English and Spanish in our classrooms. And third, I believe language education is far more than just grammar, vocabulary, or exams. It's also about belonging, justice, and how language connects to land, to culture, and to each other, connects us to each other. And as such, I coined the term colonial-lingualism to describe how colonial systems continue to privilege dominant languages and worldviews while marginalizing others, and why we need to unlearn these patterns in language education.
Thank you, Paul. And I see how that introduction connects or informs actually my first question for you, which is whether you could give us a summary of your framework in trans-epistemic language education. What does it mean and what does it look like?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. So at its core, at its heart, trans-epistemic language education is about making and creating space for dialogue across multiple ways of knowing, not just dominant white Western academic knowledge, but also Indigenous community and land-based knowledges. The word itself, trans-epistemic, simply means we go beyond a single fixed way of understanding and relating to the world. In practice, this means as language educators, we design learning to be multilingual, multimodal, and grounded in real relationships with ourselves, our ancestors, our communities, and the land. It's not just about teaching words from a textbook. It's about bringing in students or teacher educators, practitioners' lived experiences, their home languages, their cultural knowledge, and connecting all of that to land, identity, and belonging. And students use their whole repertoire: language, visuals, music, song, movement, stories to learn together. This is language education grounded in the culture, community, and the environment.
And I can see there the connections with ways of being and knowing, and perhaps that resonates with myself. And you mentioned, well, maybe in connection to the trans-epistemic language education framework, but also in connection to an element that you mentioned when you were introducing yourself, which is colonial-lingualism, right? And so my next question for you is, how can it address, the framework, how can it address colonial-lingual mindsets in language education and embrace sustainability and relational futures?
Mhm. Yes, thank you for the question. And that is important. Colonial-lingual mindsets are a legacy of colonialism, where certain languages, often dominant European nation-state languages, have been historically assumed as superior, while others, including Indigenous languages like Scottish Gaelic, were silenced or erased. Colonial-lingualism, therefore, disconnects language from place, from land, and from people. We still feel this legacy today in education policies and classrooms that prioritize dominant languages and perspectives while marginalizing others. So, trans-epistemic language education helps us to unlearn these patterns by, as I mentioned, making space for alternative ways of knowing and being. It centers the deep relational links between language, land, culture, and ecology. It's about respecting Indigenous and minoritized languages, honoring diverse worldviews, and teaching and seeing language as a bridge for connection and belonging, not just as a tool for hierarchy or extraction. When we teach language this way, we're not just teaching language, we're building relationships, fostering respect for the land, the environment around us, and preparing learners and future teachers to learn, to live and work in a more sustainable and interconnected world.
Thank you. And of course, you got me thinking about, as you mentioned, the silence and the erasure and the perpetuation of unequal distributions of power and unequal representations and marginalization, basically, while at the same time we need to be talking and doing more around sustainability. So how can this contribute? And I know that you have kind of hinted this already, but how can it contribute to creating and enacting sustainable futures?
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. So language shapes how we see and how we act and how we behave in the world. Take, for example, words in English like resource or wasteland. These reflect colonial mindsets and justify exploitation and environmental injustice. What I mean by that is, think about this. How do we treat land that we call wasteland? But language can also reflect different possibilities. For example, Glasgow, my hometown in Scotland, its Gaelic name is Glassahu, which translates to Dear Green Place or Green Hollow. When we engage with language through Indigenous place names, stories, and worldviews, we encourage learners to see land not as a commodity, but as living, relational, and worthy of care. Trans-epistemic approaches help learners connect with language in ways that respect the land, community, and future generations. Language is no longer seen as a neutral tool, but as a part of how we care for the world in an ecological sense. In practical terms, going back to what you asked, this could mean using stories, exploring Indigenous place names such as Glassahu, as I mentioned, or creating multilingual place-based projects that connect language to the local ecology, culture, and to belonging. This is how language education can actively contribute to more sustainable relational futures.
Thank you, Paul, because that gives us not only an idea of the concepts that underpin what we do as language educators, but also it gives ideas about the practices and how we may enact and reimagine ways of being and doing and belonging inside the classroom. Or it doesn't have to be a physical classroom only, but there could be different spaces for language education. And my last question for you is about this notion of dujas. What is it, and how can it help us with sustainability in the language curriculum in particular?
Yes, thank you again for the question. So dujas is an ancient Gaelic concept, and it comes from the root word du, and du can be translated as earth or land. It expresses a deep belonging to the land, to kin, so kin being human kin, family, extended family, but also more than human, such as animals, the waters, the lands around us, and community. And dujas carries with it responsibilities to place, to people, and to nature. It's not just a historical concept. Dujas is a living relational practice, going back to what you mentioned about practices here, of kinship, care, and stewardship, particularly of the land. It invites us to locate ourselves within place, to understand that we belong to the land. We don't own the land, despite what colonial-lingual mindsets might suggest. So dujas reminds us to nurture intergenerational, ecological, and cultural solidarity. In language education particularly, dujas calls on us to teach in ways that honor these connections to land, to culture, to our ancestors, to each other. What that means, practically speaking, is situating language learning and teaching in local, place-based contexts, involving community voices such as elders, knowledge keepers, and language carriers. Recognizing that so-called experts are not only academics or policymakers, but those with lived experience of the land. And finally, embedding sustainability directly into how we teach and learn. For example, rather than teaching vocabulary in isolation, we can explore Indigenous place names, traditional ecological knowledge, or cultural stories that reflect learners' environments and deepen their sense of belonging to their environment. Gaelic storytelling, or Shanachas, is a rich oral tradition that has been central to Gaelic culture for generations. It weaves together history, mythology, local knowledge, and ecological wisdom, often passed down through families or community gatherings, also known as ceilidh. Ceilidh sometimes can be translated or understood as a dance in English worldviews, but it actually means a gathering or a visit. So when I talk about dúchas and language education, I often think of Gaelic stories like those of An Cailleach, which means the old woman, where mountains, rivers, and weather aren't just physical features, but they are living parts of our stories and our communities. Language learning becomes a way of reconnecting to that relational, sustainable worldview. So, in sum, when we teach about dúchas, language classrooms can become spaces where belonging, care, and sustainability aren't just talked about or theorized, they're practiced. It's how we ensure healthy futures for our communities and our planet.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your own journey with us and with the listeners who are joining us on RELANZA. Thank you very much indeed. Muchas gracias, Paul, and I wish you a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having me. Moran Tang, many thanks. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, folks, for listening, and find the other podcasts on the same place or everywhere. My name is Darío Luis Panegas from the University of Edinburgh, and hope to find you again soon. Bye for now.
RELANZA is a project funded by the Directorate for Knowledge Transfer at UNIR and developed in collaboration with the Prodigy Research Group and the Language Curriculum SIG of the British Association for Applied Linguistics. Don't forget to visit our website to learn more about this topic and to find ideas for your lessons.